Eric Volz was in big trouble. Angry crowds milled around the courthouse. A national newspaper seemed determined to ensure the gringo didn't evade justice. And the evidence presented by the Nicaraguan prosecutor appeared overwhelming. They always say, look for the male, the boyfriend, the person who is pretty close, and you'll find your killer.
Yeah.
There was an eyewitness. There were suspicious scratches on his back and allegations that Eric had been insanely jealous of Doris's new boyfriend, had threatened to kill her. It was, in a word, grim. Or was it? Eric's family had hired the best lawyer they could find, a man who'd once defended Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega. And he had excellent ammunition. A perfect alibi. Remember, the murder happened around 12:30 p.m. in San Juan del Sur, more than 2.5 hours' drive from Managua.
The first question that the police asked me when I was interviewed the night of her murder was, Eric, where were you today from 8 o'clock in the morning until the time you received this phone call saying that Doris was dead? And the first answer out of my lips to the police was that I was in my office in Managua. He then asked, do you have witnesses that can, confirm this? Yes.
Eric testified that his housemaid woke him up that morning at his Managua apartment sometime before 9 a.m.
And then I immediately went into the office, probably around 9 o'clock, and, there was my creative director, my managerial editor, and my graphic designer.
All three provided testimony they had been with Eric, just as he claimed. But there was more. A potential business partner called. Respected Nicaraguan journalist Ricardo Castillo asked for a meeting to talk about Eric's magazine.
I called him at 10:30, 11 on the conventional line, not on the cell phone, because the meeting was set originally at 1, and then something else came up for me after 2. So I called him and asked him to move the meeting from 1 to 12. And he said yes.
Ricardo says he showed up at Eric's office at 12 noon on the dot. Were there other people in the office that day?
Yes. There were at least 7 other people.
He was with Eric, he testified, from 12 noon until after 2 p.m. And about the time the murder happened, they were both on a conference call. At the other end of the call in Atlanta was American Nick Purdy, who testified that as they talked, he and Eric were exchanging instant computer messages. He submitted the time-stamped messages to the Nicaraguan court. Eric seemed perfectly fine and even upbeat that day, said Castillo. Didn't seem nervous in any way?
Not that I noticed.
Not stressed?
Really, not at all, because then we had a very relaxed lunch afterwards.
Castillo and 9 other people testified Eric Volz was in Managua more than 2.5 hours' drive from San Juan at the time of the murder. But why call for a rental car at 1 p.m., as the prosecutor claimed, if, as Eric testified, he only found out about the murder at 2:45 p.m.?
The answer to that is it's not true. We didn't call at 1 o'clock. My secretary called around 3 o'clock, and we actually have the phone registry record that dictates that.
There's been some dispute about that car because nobody at the rental car company saw you rent it.
Well, they actually did. They did see me. They testified saying they didn't.
Sure enough, Eric's signature is on the rental car payment slip. Then Eric's defense produced cell phone records to show that Eric drove from Managua to San Juan just when he said he did.
My defense did present what's called a triangulation registry that shows where the phone calls I was making, which antennas they were being directed through. And then it shows them gradually, the antennas which correlate with the route to San Juan del Sur.
That, then, was the alibi. But Eric also responded to the prosecution's claim that Doris left these scratches on his shoulder as he attacked her. I've seen a photograph of them, and sure as heck looks like fingernail scratches.
Number one, you're not a specialist. To a lot of people, they look at it and they know that it's not nail scratches. If you look at the photograph, the skin is not torn.
But there was a perfectly good reason for the scratches, said Eric. Remember at the funeral, he was one of the 4 pallbearers?
And on the downhill side of my shoulder, you can see where the blood vessels are broken and bruised. And that's because I had the casket and it would fall down. And then I would readjust the casket. And that's why there's 2 or 3 different lines.
This video seemed to back up his story. As for that blood under Eric's fingernails, police couldn't even determine whose it was or what type, let alone where it came from. There was no DNA test on anything. And at the crime scene, argued the crack defense team, police found nothing at all linking Eric to the murder. Nothing.
They took blood samples, pubic hair samples, saliva samples, and hair samples of me, and none of it coincided with what little they did find at the crime scene.
As for a motive, jealousy. Eric admits he knew Doris was seeing someone else, but
I'm not a jealous person. What I felt was excitement. It was kind of a relief for me to know that she was kind of taking the pressure off me a little bit.
And finally, there was that eyewitness, Nelson Dangla. At trial, Dangla admitted he was an alcoholic and not exactly an upstanding citizen. In fact, police initially arrested him right after Doris's murder. He was given immunity for his testimony that he saw Eric at the crime scene.
They didn't have any evidence against me. So at the last minute, the prosecution, kind of struck a deal with Nelson Danglas.
Surely no one would believe Dangla when Eric's alibi was so watertight, backed up by credible witnesses, phone records, cell phone towers, the rental car signature. When it came to trial, you probably thought, I'll get off. No problem. Because I've got all these alibi witnesses, huh?
Yes.
In fact, Eric's defense was so solid that back in Nashville, Tennessee, his mom Maggie and stepdad Dane were making preparations to bring him home.
We're feeling more positive all the time, and literally with probably 20 minutes before the phone call came about the verdict, we were on the couch together on the computer looking for plane tickets to buy to fly Eric home.
Feeling tremendous relief at this point.
We had brought all his clothes home with us, and I'd washed them, and we had doctors prepared to see him, all sorts of things in line for him. And we just knew he was coming home.
Or was he? The phone rings in Nashville.
Jackie? And it was just ripped out from underneath us.